Welcome to Apologetics for the Church and another Every Believer Confident video. Today with me is Jeff Mindler, our research assistant. And we are talking today about my new book, Talking About Worldviews, a conversational introduction to thinking philosophically. So it's basically an introductory philosophy textbook, but focused on worldviews. And like my ethics book before this, a big part of this book is fictional. It's a discussion between four characters, Jeff, between a Christian, a Buddhist, an atheist, and an existentialist. And these four friends meet and they begin to study philosophy together. And then throughout the book, they share their different views on all kinds of topics philosophically. So if philosophy intimidates you, but you're interested, this would be a good book to start with. And we've got some stellar endorsements here from people like J.P. Moreland and who is our other big one? Gary Habermas at Liberty University.
Yeah.
So we've got great endorsements for it. And it takes you through all kinds of philosophical issues as these four friends discuss them.
Yeah.
And so you get, here's a Christian view of this issue, here's an existentialist view, an atheistic and a Buddhist view. Things like philosophy itself, logical fallacies, forming strong arguments, the nature and source of logic, belief, truth, and knowledge, justification of belief, and many more.
Yeah. So could you tell us more about like the origins of this book, the original idea behind it, and then kind of the goal in writing it? Like, who is this book for? When you set out to write it with these other authors, what were you guys hoping to intend by writing a book like that?
It was so long ago, I barely remember. No, the book was written like the ethics book that we wrote before this, Talking About Ethics. Talking About Worldviews is intended to give people an easy on-ramp into understanding philosophy. And philosophy and worldviews are connected. Mm-hmm. Basically, our worldview as Christians, is that it starts with the eternal triune God who existed long before, eternally before he chose to create the world. Mm-hmm. But then he creates the world freely and creates us in his image. And our understanding of all things begins with this idea of our creatureliness in God's deity, his divinity. That is, God is wholly different than us.
Yeah. So you fundamentally, that starting place of the creator-creature distinction, would that be fair to say?
That's right. And we have a previous video on the creator-creature distinction, especially in distinction from Eastern religions. You can find that on our YouTube channel. But as Christians, then, this is our starting point for thinking about everything, that this world was created by any omnipotent, omniscient, all-wise, all-knowing God, and he created this world for our good. And we as human beings are the summit of his creation. This is important because in the book there's several chapters on things like human identity and human importance. And throughout the book, then, the Christian character explains what he believes about these issues in contrast to the atheist, Buddhist, and existentialist. And there's a vast difference between their worldviews. And it plays out, the overarching plot of the book, Jeff, interestingly, is growing civil unrest. So there's government corruption, there's narco-terrorism, there is shootouts. There is all kinds of action in the book.
Yeah.
One of the main characters at the end of the book gets shot, and we don't know if he's going to live to the last chapter. So this is you might say, well, that's not real life, but in some sense it is. Growing civil unrest, and then how do people of different worldviews look at this unrest and look at these philosophical issues? Because even the unrest we have in our world today springs from a worldview.
Right.
A lot of it springs from neo-Marxism or even Nietzsche's nihilism that, there really is no purpose, so you have to make your own. It springs from John Locke's idea of the Leviathan, the need for an all-powerful government to control everything. It springs from Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus' existentialism, where they said, if we reject God and the idea that we're made in God's image, we have to create ourselves. So all that is woven into the book to help you understand the basics of philosophy through the lens of a worldview. What does your view of the world do for you, and how does it affect how you see everything else?
Yeah. And so a book like this is really useful for somebody who's interested in evangelism, apologetics, talking with people who of various different worldviews, and how do we think through some of the big questions of our day.
That's right.
Humanity, human identity, where does that come from? The problem of evil and suffering, I would imagine, is a big topic. And so this book really helps to guide the reader through how do these differing worldviews think about and approach these various different subjects. And I'd like us just to take a moment. I know we've been using this word worldview, but could we stop for a second and maybe let's define that for our audience of just what is a worldview and how would we define it and why is that important?
Yeah. Do you want to take that?
I mean, the first, and you can fill this in and I'll take a first stab at it. But a worldview, I would characterize it as a set of presuppositions or assumptions that kind of guide the way that we look at the world. Some folks have said it's kind of like a pair of glasses that somebody has, and through those glasses, that is how they see and interpret everything around them. So it's kind of that core set of assumptions that a person has that guides how they view the world, reality, knowledge, those kind of things. So anything you would add or take away from that to maybe clarify?
James Sire, who's a well-known Christian philosopher, says a worldview is a fundamental commitment of the heart. And I like that because we tend to think of worldview, this is a mind thing, an intellectual thing. And there certainly is a major component to that. But James Sire's definition emphasizes that this is something we are committed to with our hearts, unless obviously the Spirit of God changes you or circumstances change your worldview. People tend to fall into a worldview that works for them and gives them permission to live the life that they want to live. So a lot of times when you are sharing the gospel or talking to someone who's very different from you, you're trying to present a whole different world to them. And that's one of the reasons why gospel conversations can be so challenging and often take a lot of time to see someone totally abandon their worldview and embrace the Christian worldview, is you are casting the vision of an entirely new world to them, and they have to rethink everything.
Yeah, it's not a individual piece by piece. Right. It is, as some apologists have said, it is a clash of worldviews.
Yes.
It is not just a isolated thing over here, another thing over here, but it is a battle of worldviews. And like you said, that can be hard to completely switch from viewing the world and seeing and understanding what drives your affections and your interests and how you interpret things, and then completely abandoning that for the Christian worldview. That is a big switch.
It really is. And to be reminded that everyone either has an explicitly formed worldview or an intuitive worldview. Someone who has an intuitive worldview has never really thought much about these things like in depth and intentionally. Yeah. And so they just fall into the worldview of whatever environment they grow up in. I met a guy this week. I was in a discussion group, and he said, I'm non-religious, have no connection to religion, grew up outside of Boston, very secular, very scientific. So in his worldview, he sees things entirely mechanistically. That is, the world and everything in it has come about by chance and by natural physical mechanism, that there's nothing beyond that. Well, to share and I was able to talk about Scripture with him. To talk about that is just a radically new world for him. Yeah. And he wasn't necessarily buying it. He wasn't necessarily opposed to it, but he was trying to comprehend, like, how do you see the world differently? And for him, it was a real stretch.
Yeah. I mean, imagine going from seeing the world as purely mechanistic and natural to there being a God who's created everything and has ordained and providentially governs, and that people are special creations of him. I mean, that just putting those two side by side, you can really begin to see and highlight just how different they are, and
Yes.
and begin to kind of understand that there's a big divide there.
That's right. And you think about it, if a lot of us begin life with a worldview that we're taught from our families or from our schools when we're little, but as psychologists say, most kids begin to think abstractly around the age of 12, and they begin to ask questions, and that really is a formative time. Does this make sense for me? Do I like another worldview better? The value of this book, I think, is both our books, both talking about worldviews and talking about ethics, are written with a Christian character interacting with unbelievers in a very constructive way. And I've experienced this for the last 3.5 years, leading a philosophy study group every week in a coffee shop, learning to give and take and have conversations with unbelievers who think very differently than me, and present my case with graciousness and charity, but also conviction, and to challenge them on theirs. As Christians, we cannot be afraid to challenge them. And the Christian character in here does challenge his friends who believe very differently from him all throughout the book. Getting them to try to think, here's the implications. If we're not made in the image of God, in one scene, one of the characters who's an existentialist social worker, she is part of a group that helps police when they rescue people from human trafficking. And she goes in and talks to a young girl who's been trafficked, and she is questioning her. And internally, I wrote this chapter, internally her dialogue is conflict, because she's thinking to herself, the character grew up in a Pentecostal Christian home and at one time believed in God and the dignity of human life as made in the image of God. And as she's trying to help this girl who's been terribly abused, she's thinking within herself, I want to tell her that she's special to God, but she says, I no longer believe that. So what do I tell her? And she has this internal debate within her saying, my existentialism teaches me that I have no given identity or importance. I have to make that for myself. But she comes to realize, what can I tell this poor girl, this 14-year-old girl who's been abused, that she needs to pull herself up by her bootstraps and form an identity and find her own meaning. And so all through the book, we've written the unbelieving characters struggling with their worldview, and even sometimes the Christian as he's trying to sort out issues. But the intent is to show that these other worldviews have serious holes in their approach to the world when they try to justify ethics or right or wrong, or justice, when they try to talk about things like meaning. They come to realize in these other worldviews we hold, there are challenges that cannot be overcome.
And would you say one of the strengths of a book like this is for Christians who read this that are wanting to engage with, unbelievers they may know around some key central topics like this? This helps provide at least some examples of here's one way that you could go about a conversation of talking with them. And so that there's a real value in there of almost you're giving them these live scenarios and role plays of here's a potential situation and what the topics at hand are, and look at how the Christian in this kind of navigates through. And that could give people, some ideas of, okay, maybe let me try that, next time I'm at, a family holiday with, such and such uncle who's the unbeliever and who always likes to stir up trouble. Well, maybe get this book and, see how the Christian in here navigates those conversations and see how that goes. Maybe use some of those. So there's a lot of value in just here's what this could look like in one or other situations.
And even in the book, there's 2 chapters, theistic apologetics and atheistic apologetics. So in one of the chapters, the friends ask the Christian, can you present a case for Christianity? We'd love to hear it. We're not sure we've ever heard it before. And so there's a very strong apologetic argument made for the truth of Christianity. And in the next chapter, the atheists, they ask him, can you present your case for atheism? So you get to see here are the ways we should think as Christians in defending what we believe, and here's the way an atheist would defend what he believes or she believes. And here's some problems with that. And so there's a lot of dialogue back and forth. Again, I think there's 24 chapters, so 24 aspects of philosophy at a very introductory level. And every chapter, half the chapter is fictional narrative following this plot of growing civil unrest. And the second half of each chapter is basically just a teaching.
Yeah.
Here's what the characters were talking about. Here are the options of thinking about it a certain way.
Yeah. So it really gives the reader the basic grammar of here are the philosophical subjects we've been talking about, and to give them that basic understanding along the lines of here's what you're seeing in the conversations and understanding these concepts. So it really is a great introduction to major philosophical points.
Yeah, absolutely. So I encourage you to pick up the book. You'll learn 2 things. Number 1, what a stereotypical fiction writer I am. I think we've added some depth to the characters, but it's really challenged me to think, wow, writing fiction is so much harder than nonfiction. Nonfiction, where I'm just trying to write what I believe to be true, but fiction, you've got to develop characters and have realistic plots.
Yeah.
But I would like to read a little bit of one of the chapters. This is the chapter on atheistic apologetics. That is, the atheistic character is seeking to defend his unbelief, but at the same time, the Christian is challenging him on certain things. So the atheistic character's name is Zach. The Christian's character name is Angelo. And then there's a woman, the existentialist social worker, Hannah. And then there's Suresh, who's the Buddhist. So Zach is the atheistic character, and he's writing. His friends have asked him to present a case for atheism. So he says this: even though they are different, that is, different forms of atheism, and he references the book 7 Types of Atheism by John Gray. He says, even though they are different, the common denominator is that atheists have no use for the idea of a divine mind that has fashioned the world. Essentially, atheism isn't a positive belief, but rather a lack of belief. As a result, most atheists don't believe their viewpoint needs to be defended. Rather, religion needs to put forth a compelling case that deities exist. The character says, I don't have to prove a universal negative, such as that there are no naturally occurring hot pink swans in the world. Rather, someone who argues for their existence would have to present compelling evidence for such a claim to be plausible. In the same way, atheists don't believe in gods because they haven't found the arguments convincing. Hannah, the existentialist social worker, says, or maybe also because the brokenness and absurdity of the world have eliminated the plausibility that deities, even if they exist, don't care about us. They don't help us, rendering them inconsequential to us. That's the reason I abandoned belief in the Christian God. Zach, the atheist, responds, that's the 7th kind of atheism in Gray's book. It's an atheism of silence that summarizes life as pain, which would not be so if any kind of loving God existed. The divine may be identical with the world, and therefore not personal. In that case, it's easier to simply speak of the world and stop using the term God. I take it that's not your type of atheism? Hannah knew she and Zach shared a disbelief in any kind of God, but probably for very different reasons. That's right, although I'd add the heartlessness of the world to my list of reasons for disbelieving. It's not the main reason, but I agree with you. Red in tooth and claw, Angelo asked. Angelo's the Christian. He was met with blank stares. Then he surprised everyone by quoting from Alfred Tennyson's poem In Memoriam, AHH. And here's the text of the poem. Who trusted God was love indeed, and love creation's final law, though nature red in tooth and claw with ravine shrieked against his creed. Wow, how did you do that? Suresh said. He thought maybe he'd read that poem in high school but didn't remember it well enough to quote it. I've always loved poetry. I try to memorize poems that speak about belief or loss of belief in God. That stanza speaks about the challenge that the apparent cruelty of nature presents to belief in a caring God. I like poetry, but I don't think I have any memorized, Zach said. Do you know any others? Angelo shook his head and looked down at his hands. I don't want to distract from your presentation. It's not a distraction, Zach said. Okay, one more. This is from a poem called Dover Beach from 19th century English poet Matthew Arnold. Angelo looked into the eyes of his friends as he quoted the poem. The sea of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy, long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Ooh, that one gives me shivers, Hannah said. It reminds me of my own journey out of faith. Okay, I humored you, Angelo said with a smile. Now let's get back to your presentation, Zach. So Zach, the atheist, returns to talking about why he doesn't believe in God. A little bit later, Zach says this, I'm remembering this line of thinking from your argument for Christianity, Angelo. So you're saying that God can be known and is known, but is rejected because people want to do what they want. Essentially, yes, Angelo said. Do you have a poem for that? Zach asked, half joking. Angelo laughed. Actually, I do. Hannah leaned forward. Wait, are you kidding, Angelo? You must be, Suresh said. Zach waved his hand, inviting Angelo to share. Angelo began. This one is called The Garden of Love by William Blake. He looked at the ceiling for a moment to gather his thoughts. Then he closed his eyes and began to speak. I went to the Garden of Love and saw what I never had seen. A chapel was built in the midst where I used to play on the green, and the gates of this chapel were shut, and thou shalt not writ over the door. So I turned to the garden of love that so many sweet flowers bore, and I saw it was filled with graves and tombstones where flowers should be, and priests in black gowns were walking their rounds and binding with briars my joys and desires. Angelo opened his eyes and looked around at his friends. Forgive me, Suresh said. I'm not sure what that poet is trying to say. He's talking about how religion, portrayed as a church building, commandments, tombs, and priests, has ruined the pursuit of his desires, which he calls the Garden of Love. I think it has an even deeper meaning, Hannah said. Isn't the writer sort of implying something about the Christian story of the fall into sin? Rather than the garden being where God originally was found and worshipped by the people made in his image, the garden in the poem is a paradise of following your own desires that is ruined by the presence of God. What? Angelo's mouth fell open. I never thought about it that way. That was a good one, Zach said. I may need to revisit later. He looked around the table and continued his defense of his atheism. Now I want to kind of read toward the end of the chapter. Zach sums up his argument for atheism. He says, that sums up well my view of the non-existence of God. I don't believe in any God, let alone the Christian God, because I can do without him. I don't need to believe in God to do science or to be a good person. Does that make sense? Zach repeated his question before realizing that Angelo wasn't listening. Angelo's eyes were fixed on something beyond Zach's left shoulder. Angelo, did you hear Zach? Hannah asked. Suresh had already traced Angelo's gaze to its target. A man was standing near the entrance of the coffee shop close to the back of the small line at the register. His appearance was unremarkable. Average height, dark brown hair, neatly dressed. Nothing unusual, nothing that is except his eyes. The man's eyes swept slowly left to right and then back again. As his gaze turned toward their table, Suresh felt a shiver run down his spine. The man's eyes were cold and lifeless and somehow menacing. Suresh was startled by his eyes and the brain's ability to perceive this unusual characteristic in a total stranger standing 25 feet away, but it was unmistakable. Panic rose in Hannah's throat. Angelo had clearly tuned them and everything else in the coffee shop out. She thought about what had happened at Suresh's restaurant a few weeks before. She suddenly felt unsafe. She had experienced this feeling before, usually when making a home visit without anyone accompanying her. Angelo didn't move his head. His reflexes kicked in, and he reflexively slid his right hand down to his side. Angelo is a security guard. Nothing. He remembered that he was off duty and wasn't carrying his sidearm. As the man near the door began to look away, Angelo dropped his eyes to his coffee cup to avoid alerting the man that he was watching him. When Angelo sensed the man's gaze moving away from him, he looked up again. It was unmistakable. The man was surveilling the room. Angelo quickly glanced around the cafe. No one else besides his friend seemed to be paying attention to the man. Angelo quickly made mental notes about the man's appearance, especially his facial features. Mid-30s. He noticed the man's hairline, build, and clothing. He seemed to be fit with no sign of a belly, but not overly muscular either. No visible scars or tattoos. His earlobes were attached, significant as only 2 to 3% of the U.S. population has that feature. The figure could be as high as 50% in other countries, but Angelo couldn't determine the man's ethnicity. He really did blend in. Angelo's assessment of the man took mere seconds. Am I being paranoid? The man wasn't doing anything suspicious beyond his methodical visual sweep of the room, which he had now done 3 times. But with everything that was going on in Greenfield, Angelo wasn't taking chances. The recent training they'd received from the FBI said not to ignore their instincts. Sometimes the intangibles tipped off law enforcement to criminals or terrorists. Angelo, what is it? Hannah's voice was low and edged with fear. Zach never turned around as he sensed Angelo was locked onto something of concern. He had noticed when Angelo's hand drifted down to his side, he too felt the chill of fear without ever seeing what was causing it. A noisy group of 6 teenagers burst into the coffee shop, and like magic, the man disappeared out the door. Angelo caught a quick glimpse of him walking away down the sidewalk before he vanished entirely. Angelo leaped to his feet. I'm sorry, everyone. I need to get to the police department. Hannah grabbed his arm. What did you see, Angelo? I saw it too, Angelo. Suresh knew what he saw, even if he couldn't exactly explain what it was. Angelo shook his head. Something was off about that man by the counter. I don't like the way he was methodically looking at the customers here. He looked at Hannah. Please don't worry. I just need to file a report while his face is fresh in my mind. With everything going on around Greenfield, it's better to be safe. Go, Zach said. Do what you need to do, and thank you for everything you do to keep the community safe. So in the next couple chapters, they catch the man, and Angelo has an opportunity to talk to him, and the man is working for the cartels and espouses a kind of Nietzschean ethics of power and cruelty and aggression, and he's battling with that all through the book. So there's this overarching plot of civil unrest, narco-terrorism. There's a shooting earlier in the book and one later in the book. At the same time, there are things going on in each of their lives that are affecting and challenging their worldviews. So should be a fun book to read.
Yeah, I was going to say, get the book if you want to find out what happens at the end and how the story resolves. So that was a great appetizer for the book. And so hopefully the audience will pick it up and read it and really digest and think through some of these ideas and how you could apply them to your own conversations with unbelievers, of various different worldviews. And we hope it can provide a good set of tools to do just that. So anything else you want to say to finalize as we wrap up?
Yeah, I would just encourage people, this book and our ethics book models the idea of conversations with unbelievers. Mm-hmm. A lot of times as Christians, we think we've got to just get to Jesus right away and not listen to anything the unbeliever has to say and just get that gospel burp out there. How do I tell the whole story of the gospel before they cut me off? And in my own life, I've experienced this, and this shows up in both the books, talking about ethics and talking about worldviews. It's okay to have a conversation with an unbeliever and spend some time asking them what they believe and exploring that. What'll happen is you'll start to see problems in their worldview, and in a very friendly conversational way, you can begin to ask questions that challenge that. And you'd be surprised once you take the time to listen to what the unbelievers believe and hold to, they are then willing to listen to what you have to say. And I just want to encourage all of our listeners and viewers, start conversations wherever you go. Some of them won't go anywhere. That's okay. But you'd be surprised if you take the time to find out, what other people believe and ask the big worldview questions. Questions like, how did we get here? Why are we here? How do we find purpose? Where are we going? Mm-hmm. What's wrong with the world? What would make it better? Everyone at least has intuitive ideas about these things. And a lot of people you meet have actually thought through them in great detail. Take the time to ask people, listen. It may not always lead to a gospel conversation, but by listening to what other people believe, you'll see things that you can question and challenge, and that opens the door for you to share your view of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. I hope this episode has encouraged you to do that, and if you'd be interested in the book, it's Talking About Worldviews by Michael Jones, Mark Farnham, and David Saxon. And our companion book is called Talking About Ethics, same three authors. And it'll be a great model and help for you as you learn both ethics and philosophy in a way of constructive dialogue between Christians and unbelievers. Thanks. If you enjoyed this video and would like to find more resources on apologetics, go to apologeticsforthechurch.org.